Join the Thinking in English Conversation Club right now. For just $2 a week, you can join with other English learners, practice speaking, have conversations, enjoy yourself, and use new vocabulary. We run conversation clubs every Tuesday and Thursday at 12 p.m, 6 p.m, and 9 p.m. UK time. So there's no excuse. You can join, and you should join right now. Join the Thinking in English Conversation Club, link in the description. Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. Sudan is in a state of crisis. Conflict is raging between military and paramilitary forces, and ordinary Sudanese people are trapped in the middle of the violence. Today, let's discuss the background of this conflict, why fighting started, and what the future holds for Sudan. You can find the full transcript over on the Thinking in English blog. Check out my YouTube channel and Instagram page for more content. Subscribe to my Patreon to improve your English and join my conversation groups. And here is today's vocabulary list. Paramilitary. Paramilitary. A paramilitary group is organized like an army but is not official and often not legal. For instance, paramilitary forces have been involved in conflicts across Africa. Civilian. Civilian. Relating to a person who is not a member of the police or the armed forces, as in, the army has been criticized for attacking the unarmed civilian population. Outbreak. Outbreak. A sudden appearance of something, especially a disease or something else dangerous or unpleasant. For instance, the outbreak of war came as a surprise. Coup d'etat. Coup d'etat. A sudden defeat of a government through illegal force by a small group, often a military group. As in, a coup d'etat occurred in Myanmar a few years ago. Transition. Transition. A change from one form or type to another, or the process by which this happens. For example, there will be an interim government to oversee the transition to democracy. To redeploy. To redeploy. To move employees, soldiers, equipment, etc. to a different place or to use them in a more effective way. For example, the soldier was redeployed across the country. To bear the brunt. To bear the brunt. To put up with the worst of some bad circumstances. For example, the secretary had to bear the brunt of the doctor's anger. Ramification. Ramification. The possible results of an action. For example, have you considered all the ramifications of your suggestion? Sudan is currently in crisis. As I'm writing this episode, fighting is raging in the African country's capital city, Khartoum. Gunfire can be heard in the streets, while military jets are bombing targets across the country. Sudan is one of the least stable countries in the world. I even recorded an episode last year about Sudan, called The Most Unstable Country in the World. And the current crisis is just the latest in decades of military coups, revolutions, civil wars, and armed conflicts. On Saturday, a power struggle between the Sudanese military and a paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, broke out. The two sides are, as I'm writing this, struggling to control the country's media, government buildings and military bases. Sudanese citizens have been warned to stay inside. The Air Force is conducting bombings targeting RSF bases and camps, while gunfire has been reported in cities across the country. Already, many people have been killed, including civilians, and hundreds more injured in the violence. The RSF have been looting parts of the capital city, with residents reporting that members of the paramilitary force have been demanding water and food from people's houses. The UN's World Food Programme has suspended its actions after 3 of its employees were killed in the fighting. According to journalists and news reports, armed vehicles have been seen in the streets of the capital city. Planes have been lit on fire in the main airport, with most airlines suspending their flights to the country. The crisis was made worse by the fact this outbreak of violence came as a surprise to most Sudanese citizens. People were caught out by the sudden clashes, with many people stuck at work or school and unable to move around the cities due to violence and road closures. So far, agreements to avoid fighting, to allow evacuations and supplies to be delivered, have not been respected by both sides. A US diplomatic convoy through the country was attacked, and the EU ambassador to the country was assaulted in his home. Let's take a look at the background of this conflict and who is involved. In October 2021, Sudan experienced a military coup d'etat. For most countries, a military coup is a major historical event. In fact, most countries will never experience such an event. Sudan is a little different. Since its independence in 1956, Sudan has suffered 16 attempted coups. 6 have been successful and 10 have failed. Almost every time a government has attempted to create a stable political environment, the military has stepped in and taken control. In 2019, the long-time dictator of the country, Omar al-Bashir, was overthrown by the military after he was accused of genocide and other war crimes by the International Criminal Court. A plan was made to eventually transition Sudan into a democracy, with a form of joint rule between the military and civilian politicians proposed until that could be achieved. In October 2021, that civilian-military government was once again overthrown by the military. The Prime Minister was arrested, internet restricted, and media fell under military control. The army said they intended to hold elections in July 2023 and eventually transition Sudan to a democracy again. Since then, Sudan has been run by a council of military generals. The effective leader of Sudan is General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the head of the Sudanese armed forces. His deputy, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, otherwise known as Hemeti, is the leader of the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. These two powerful figures have strongly disagreed about the future direction of Sudan. One of the major arguments is over the future role of the RSF, and how or when to incorporate them into the nation's real army. As both the military and the RSF control large parts of Sudan's economy, it is likely the leaders of both groups are nervous at losing their wealth and power. But before we go further, what are the Rapid Support Forces? Well, the RSF is a paramilitary force in Sudan that was established in about 2013. A paramilitary force is an organized group that operates like a military force, but is not a part of the official armed forces of a country. Paramilitary forces are typically established to carry out specific tasks that are not the job of the regular military, such as internal security operations, or counter-insurgency campaigns. The RSF was formed by the Sudanese government as a counter-insurgency force to fight rebel groups in Darfur, but it has since been involved in various other conflicts across Sudan. The RSF is primarily composed of former members of the Janjaweed, a notorious militia that was accused of committing war crimes during the Darfur conflict. The RSF has been accused of committing human rights abuses and war crimes in its operations, including killings, torture, and the forcible displacement of civilians. In recent years, the RSF has played a key role in the transitional government in Sudan following the overthrow of the dictator Omar al-Bashir. The RSF has been involved in efforts to maintain security and stability in the country, but its continued presence and influence have raised concerns about the role of paramilitary forces in the political transition. The group has also operated outside of Sudan, in Libya and Yemen, and apparently has economic interests in Sudanese gold mines. In February, Hemeti, the leader of the RSF, gave a speech on Sudanese TV in which he announced that the 2021 coup had been a mistake. He claimed that allies of the former dictator Bashir were regaining their power. In the same speech, he praised the plan to restore civilian rule in Sudan and claimed he wanted to listen to pro-democracy activists in the country. This speech was a clear sign of the growing tension between his paramilitary RSF and the army led by General al-Burhan, the effective leader of the country. Many observers suggested these comments were a deliberate attempt to demonstrate a break between the RSF and the army. Hemeti has often discussed his own political ambitions and was clearly appealing to the civilian groups angry with the continued military rule. It's important to acknowledge that the RSF have committed massacres and participated in genocide only a few years ago. The group was allied to the dictator al-Bashir for many years. But with the support of civilian groups, perhaps the RSF was preparing for a move against the military. Over the past few weeks, members of the RSF were redeployed around the country, and the army saw this as a clear threat. Although talks were held between the two sides, fighting broke out on Saturday morning. The ongoing conflict in Sudan poses a serious threat, as it has the potential to further fragment the country and intensify the existing political turbulence. The outbreak of fighting will lead to the displacement of people, destruction of property and infrastructure, and the loss of lives. To address the situation, diplomats have already been encouraging a return to civilian rule and facilitating dialogue between the two opposing factions. While diplomatic efforts are ongoing, it is hoped that a peaceful resolution can be achieved through negotiation. This might not be likely. The situation remains uncertain, and ordinary Sudanese people continue to bear the brunt of the conflict. Violence will severely disrupt daily lives, making it difficult for people to access essential services such as healthcare, education, and food. And all conflicts have a significant economic impact, with businesses closing down and people losing their jobs, exacerbating an already challenging situation. As the conflict carries on, the ordinary Sudanese people are left to endure another period of uncertainty, with potential long-term ramifications for the country's stability and development. It is crucial that all people involved prioritize the welfare of the Sudanese people and work towards a peaceful resolution. So here is today's final thought. Sudan is currently in a state of crisis. due to a power struggle between the Sudanese military and a paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces. The conflict erupted in the capital city Khartoum and has led to violence, killings, and injuries. The military coup in October 2021 and the disagreement between the military and the RSF over the future role of the RSF have contributed to the current instability in the country. The continued presence of paramilitary forces in the political transition and economic interests have raised concerns about the future of Sudan. But what do you think? What actions can the international community take? What are the long-term solutions to address the instability and repeated military coups in Sudan? And has your country ever faced such an issue? Maybe a military coup, a revolution, or a civil war? Let me know by leaving a comment. Leave a comment on Spotify. Leave a comment on the Thinking in English transcript. This episode has a full transcript. It's linked down below. You can also find it on the blog. Or send me a message on Instagram. And if it's a good message, I might share it on my story as well. But thank you all for listening. Thank you all for listening to this episode. You can support the podcast by subscribing to me on Patreon and joining my conversation groups and listening to bonus episodes. The link is in the description. Check out my Instagram page and YouTube channel. Leave me a 5-star rating wherever you're listening, maybe on Spotify and Apple especially. And yeah, thank you. I'll see you all next time.